Hi students, and welcome to the second session of Project Management. This is the resource support session number 2, and as mentioned we have 3 resource support sessions for each subject, as well as the 4th session, which is our assessment support. So this is number 2. In this session we're going to be focusing on the learning activity, project risk and budgeting. So I'm just going to open that one up. This is the activity that we're going to be focusing on today. All of the questions here that you see before you, there's 6 questions. By the end of this session, you'll have all of the information that you need to go off and successfully complete this particular learning activity, project, risk, and budgeting. Now, the next 2 sessions that follow this one, we'll be looking at the next handful of learning activities. So we'll be looking at project rollout and resourcing, as well as project success and lesson. In the next session, that'll be the 3rd session, and then the 4th session will be dedicated to the 3 assessment tasks that students you will need to complete for the subject, the second subject in the qualification project management. So just a quick recap on the last week's session or yesterday's session as well, the resource support session 1. We introduced the topic of projects. So we started looking at what a project actually is. We started talking about words like scoping. So, you know, the initial phase, the planning phase, the preparation phase of a project. We talked about that 15% benchmark that's essential for success in scoping of a project, spending that time preparing and planning. We talked a little bit about project documentation and tools that you might use in a project, using a systematic approach and breaking projects down to smaller bite-sized pieces. We also talked about stakeholders and what their needs and expectations are and how they can differ between different stakeholder groups. And yeah, and then I guess the 3 of us all also contributed by talking about different experiences we've had with regards to different project teams and so on and so forth. In today's session, we're going to be covering the concept of risk. So we're going to be talking a little bit about risk. We'll be talking about a few different varieties of risks, the different types of risks that we see. We'll also be looking at risk management. So just broadly, just going over the subject of risk management, what that actually means, how to actually assess any given risk. We'll also look at things like contingency planning, which is a big part of risk management. So what you do, what to do in the event of a risk or a hazard actually occurring. As per the questions we'll be guiding you through, we'll also be looking at a SWOT analysis, and then we'll be broaching on those last couple of questions as well, things like communication and so on and so forth. So without further ado, Alison and Alyssa, how are you guys doing?
Really well today, thanks. How are you?
I should have asked you one at a time. I'm good. That was perfect harmony. Sounds great. So look, I usually feel the best way to start with these is a bit of a definition. It's always a good starting point. And you know, if any of us want to sort of share any anecdotes or stories, then that's always a good way to sort of get going as well. So as far as risk is concerned, I'm actually just going to pull up a couple of definitions that I've got here in front of me. I've got a Google definition which says that risk is a situation involving exposure to danger. That's one definition of a risk. I've got another one here which actually puts the word hazard and risks together, and this is taken from WorkSafe website, and this actually defines hazards and risks as, well, a hazard is anything in the workplace that has the potential to harm people. Hazards can include objects in the workplace such as machinery, dangerous chemicals, so on and so forth. There too, I think they very, very much strongly weighted to the harm of an individual. And as we start talking about different types of risks, we'll discover that there's more than just what can actually harm an individual. Are you guys familiar with PMBOK? PMBOK? There's an institute called Project Management Institute. And the Project Management Institute have actually published a book, and it's the short form of the book is called PMBOK, which is PMBOK. But PMBOK is a guide to the project management body of knowledge. It's effectively a book which presents a set of standard terminologies and guidelines for project management. It's kind of like the Bible for project managers out there, the PMBOK, or a guide to project management body of knowledge, which is what PMBOK actually stands for. And so the PMBOK guide identifies a whole subset of project management knowledge and what we call good practice or generally recognized good practice. So these are the standard ways that things should be done and dealt with. The actual book acknowledges 5 basic process groups and 10 knowledge areas, one of which is project risk management. So I guess when we're talking about risk today, it's good to know that this is one of the key cornerstones of project management is understanding risk. Now, where I'm going with this is that PMBOK, or the actual book itself, defines risk as an uncertain event or condition if it occurs, has a positive or negative effect on a project's objectives. That's a really, really broad, general sort of definition for that because it actually includes having a positive effect as well as having a negative effect. But um, it's important, I guess, to note that with regards to risk, there are more areas than just safety risks that we need to consider, and this is what I guess we'll start to delve into when we talk a little bit about um, risk types. So, and again, just to wrap up, why does all of this sort of stuff matter? To be an effective project manager, you really need to be able to identify, assess, and control or mitigate risks from your project to ensure success. And that's really what the process of risk management is all about. It's being able to identify and assess and then control and minimize the likelihood that these particular risks or hazards are going to occur and create an unforeseen event on our given project. So I think it's probably a good time to start talking about different types of risks. Before I do, guys, did you want to add anything to, I guess, the where risk fits into project management as a whole, or a definition of risk in your eyes, or anything about risk before we get stuck into identifying some of the different types of risks?
It's just really about being, prepared. We talked yesterday about the planning stages and the importance of planning all the steps along the way and having the right people involved and the right duties and managing to make sure that everything fits within budget, all of those aspects. But you do also just have to take a step back and think about what could go wrong. And it's not always, workplace health and safety wise. It could be monetary wise, or there's so
Absolutely.
many different aspects of things that could go wrong. So it's
Absolutely.
a matter of being prepared as best you can. So thinking about the bigger picture, getting, consulting with the right people. So, having the right people in your team, or even sometimes you might have to outsource for some advice, just to make sure that you do have ways to potentially avoid the risk, or actually have plans, contingency plans in place.
Absolutely, and we're going to talk a little bit about contingency plans in a little bit. Actually, I'll throw a couple of examples at you guys, and we'll talk about different ways that we can put things in place to, and that's what a contingency is all about, to, I guess, to minimize that. But you're spot on. Risk management, and talking about the subject of risk, it really does fit into that initial scoping, planning, and preparation stage. It's a big part of it. In fact, understanding the different risks on your project is really understanding what the whole scope of your project's all about in any case. So it very, very much goes hand in hand with that planning and that preparation phase. So in talking about risks, as I sort of mentioned earlier, we normally associate safety risks. And in fact, the first two definitions, one from WorkSafe that I've read out and the other one which was just from Google, but those first two definitions are also highly and heavily slanted towards those risks that can cause injury or harm to an individual. In reality, and you started to touch on it just then, Alison, there are many types of risks that project managers need to think about. There's a great website, and I'm actually just going to click straight on it now. I found this actually, and you can find these sort of things if you do a bit of a search on different risk types. Actually, guys, are you looking at my screen? I should double check. You are. Yep. Okay. Um, yeah, this is off the smallbusiness.wa.gov.au site. It actually just lists a whole range of different risk types, and I think we'll just go through some of these because as we just discussed them, you go, oh, of course. I didn't even think about that. Yeah, of course. Absolutely. Yes. So, and the other part of this is eventually when you guys are going to do your own project brief as part of your first assessment task for this subject, you're going to be asked to identify 5 risks on your project, and they'll need to be 5 different risk types. So they can't just be safety risks or health and safety hazards on your project, but you'll need to identify some others. So some of the other categories that we find here, we have, well, the first one is commercial. And so the definition as read here from the actual website is includes the risks associated with market placement, business growth, diversification, and commercial success. So this relates to the commercial viability of a product or service and extends through the establishment to retention and the growth of a customer base. So that's that first one. So a risk to the commerciality, the commercial viability of a product and service. So there's one. Here's another one which pops its head up, which is what we call a compliance or a legal risk. So any compliance or legal risks includes compliance with legal requirements such as legislation, regulation, standards, codes of practice. It could be a contractual requirement as well. So anything which is likely to breach those any given legislation, regulation, or standard is a compliance or legal risk. And this is they're dangerous sort of risks as well because we know that these risks can end up in long court cases, expensive legal battles, and what have you. So there's a risk type that you should be considering when you're putting together your project brief as well. Guys, feel free to jump in if you want to have mention anything at this point. Actually, Alison, you did talk about this next one, financial risk. So again, this is its own category in of itself. So a financial risk is what's defined here. It includes cash flow, budgetary requirements, tax obligations, creditor and debtor management remuneration, and other general account management concerns. The obvious one there is cash flow. What's a risk to a potential project or business could be running out of available cash flow. And so it's something that needs to be
I think,
considered.
yeah, I definitely think this is actually quite a substantial risk for consideration when you are dealing with a project. That financial element, I know that maybe some students out there probably may not have as much exposure to the financial arms of things, but essentially without the financial support and without that element within a project, it becomes very difficult to, you become quite restricted, I think. So the financial risks associated with a project can be quite debilitating on your project. So that's why it's always good to really, I think, focus around this type of element because this can throw you out quite considerably. Lots of unpredictable kind of financial things could pop up during things that you didn't expect or things that you didn't anticipate when it comes to finances. So I think this is quite a big one. I still think, though, that the compliance and legal risk, as you mentioned, Adam, can have a massive impact on a project, and
Yeah.
then that financial element is also quite considerable too. Yeah.
They all tend to. I mean, obviously the next one is
Yeah.
the one that we all tend to think of when we think about risks, which is the health and safety risk. So we do want you to still consider that. We don't want you to not consider it, but we just want you to consider it in relation to other risk types as well that you're going to be managing as project managers. So a health and safety risk, well, that just includes the safety of everyone associated with the business, extends from individual safety to workplace safety, public safety, and so forth. So that's the one that we're already kind of comfortable with. Um, let's have a look at the next one. So an environmental risk, as defined here, includes loss or damage due to accidents or natural disasters such as fire, flood, hail or storms. It can extend to property damage caused by burst water pipes or power failure. So I guess anything that's out there in the environment that has the potential to cause damage or accidents is an environmental risk. It's a risk that is out there that could already potentially exist. Um, if you're building a property and it sits below sea level, or if it sits underneath a riverbed, one of the risks that you might have to include is the risk of flood. And different situations call for different risk analysis on these types of risk as well. So if I've got a business that's potentially out in the forest and I'm surrounded by trees, I've got a big risk for things like bushfire and fire. So as part of I guess this is the first stage in risk assessment, is really understanding, identifying the different risks that are out there. These environmental risks might not be appropriate to every single project, but it's good to think about, what does Mother Nature have to say about what we're about to be doing, and is there any potential risk associated there that we can look to try and minimize or mitigate? Do you guys want to add anything to environmental risks at all?
It's one of those things, isn't it? It's like almost something that the reason that we have contingency plans is that sometimes, we can't control every element, but we can have, and especially when it comes to things like Mother Nature, I mean, it is very, very, very unpredictable and can be very, very damaging. And, as you said, if you are building something in an environmental area or in, something to that nature, I think that kind of thing can be very, very unpredictable, but having some
Mm,
kind of contingency plan in place is probably the best bet for you. Um, yeah, so,
that's all you
and,
can do.
and of late as well, yeah, I mean, those things like fire and flood and hail and storms as well as a big part of, I think, a risk management program if you are considering a project structurally in an external environment.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Mm.
They're just, you know what, it's food for thought. And this is exactly why we're sort of showing this to you guys. It's really just about understanding that there's a whole range of different things that can, unfortunately, go wrong. Um, and this is part of our planning. This is part of our scoping. It's understanding where our project reaches to and putting in place things that can actually be put into place to minimize, and that's what a contingency is anyway. It's just putting in place things that minimize the likelihood of that event actually happening or that risk actually occurring, and that's what it's about.
Mm.
There's a few more here that'll be of interest. Reputation, well, that's for me, and I might be wrong here, but I mean, reputation just to me is just another version of commerciality or commercial risks. So a reputational risk here entails the threat to the reputation of a business due to the conduct of the entity as a whole, um, the viability of a product or service, and so forth. So look, if in the project what we're going to be doing is going to deeply offend the majority of our customer base, that's potentially a reputational risk. Maybe it's something that we want to consider or maybe not do or change the way we go about it because we don't want to affect the reputation of our business. To me is also just a commercial risk. So any risk associated with, business growth or commercial success, commercial viability, I'm putting that in the same boat. But it's interesting to consider reputation because you sort of, when you think about commerciality, you think about, making money and diversifying the business and how the market responds to us. But reputation, that's really reflective of, I guess, your business ethics. So how well does,
Mm.
the business operate in the marketplace? So a good category to think of. There's a few other categories here: strategic, operational, service delivery, project security risks. There's always security risk out there. Technological risks are another one. Stakeholder management, that's an interesting one there. Operational is one that I wanted to mention as well. Operation, as it's written here, covers the planning, operational activities, resources, including people and support required within the operations of a business that result in the successful development and delivery of a product and service. It's a really long sort of explanation. For me, uh, an operational risk, is one that actually affects the day-to-day runnings of a business. So the best way to sort of say this is, as we've sort of identified from our last session in project management, what defines a project is that a project is unique. It's a once-off. It happens once. We have a start, we have a middle, and we have an end of this particular project. We have a project team that are employed to take the project through from start to completion, from scope to implementation, rollout, and delivery. An operational risk is something that will affect the regular day-to-day operations of the business. So just imagine a business that's deciding what we're going to do is we're going to open up a brand new store. We're a franchise. We're going to open up a new store. We've put together a project team to help us with the, you know, opening of this brand new franchise, brand new store. An operational risk in that context would be anything that might affect the rest of the business being able to do their day-to-day business. So if I take all of these staff members off all of my existing stores to come and help on this project team, and now we are completely under-resourced for our regular franchise and regular business, that's potential operational risk on the project. Guys, does that sort of make sense to you with operational risk?
Yep, absolutely.
Okay,
Yeah, it's it,
I think
it is really an important one, that one, because there's so many different things that can be affected, as well as you said, sort of having people doing too much, but then the ongoing, stress, people feeling overworked, that sort of thing. So that can then become a,
wow.
physical issue,
That
so things can spin out of control if they're not considered and planned for at the get-go.
I never even considered the effect that, I guess the health and mental health or the physical state of employees might be an operational risk, but you're 100% correct. I mean, if we're actually pushing our staff or our project team too hard, they may not be able to conduct their regular day-to-day business, and our operations or our business might suffer dramatically. So, yeah, when it comes to operational, just think day-to-day runnings of the business. What on this project could affect the day-to-day runnings of the business? And you know what? It's such a wide open category. I mean, as soon as you start to sort of think about it, it's almost endless. But I guess, look, they're the main ones when it comes to project risk. We won't go into the other ones, I guess, just yet. But they're the main ones I wanted to talk through with you guys about, and it gives us I guess, an overview of different risk types and what have you. The first question for the guys is give 2 examples of possible risks you may face when planning a project. For example, a major milestone, time frame hasn't been met, or budgets blow out. What might you do to mitigate this risk? So this could be a project that you're involved in, a project that you've researched, or you can even use one of our an example project. I'll give you a couple of example projects. One of which you saw in the previous learning activity was you've been commissioned to paint or refurbish Parliament House in Canberra. If you're not sure on what project to use, you can use that as a project. Give us a couple of examples of risks that might be on that particular project. Have you guys got any other examples that the students might be able to use if they're not sure of a project example to provide in this situation?
I mean, I think that if they are struggling for an example of a project, I mean, I would be happy to use I would probably be happy for them to use that Canberra one. I think that was a good
Yep.
little a good little project in there, because sometimes, I mean, it can be quite hard to kind of, I guess, make reference to a project. So I think if they stick to the Canberra one, I think that would be a great option for them, unless of course they have already been previously involved in an actual project itself. But
Sure.
yeah,
If you guys have
I
been
would encourage them to do that. Yeah.
Absolutely. If the guys have been involved in a project, they're welcome to use it. Otherwise, please just use that
Yeah.
example. Or if you've
Yeah.
got done a project around your own house, something that you've done around the house that you, because you've been involved in it, you've sort of seen firsthand. We just want a couple of examples, and then we want you to actually to finish that question. Actually, just to answer what might you do to mitigate that those risks. So you've got 2 examples of risks. The second part of that question is explain what might you do to mitigate, which is, I guess, leading on to um,
Mm.
question 2, which is list 2 contingency plans that would work for a project that you've implemented or researched. So I guess now's a good time to talk a little bit about contingency planning. Um, yeah, how would you guys define contingency planning?
I say the what if. What if this happens? What if this happens? Prepare for the unexpected. When we talk about contingency planning, I think as like in terms of the state of Australia, in terms of natural disasters, in terms of political changes, I mean, I think you always have to try and expect the unexpected. Like I think that there's nothing that can never definitely be guaranteed that something won't go wrong. So I think in terms of a contingency plan, it's always, your plan B. So what if this happens?
Beautifully said.
There might be a huge likelihood that it may not happen, but you know what? I'm of the thought process that it's better to be prepared than to be unprepared,
Better
and
to be
that's what
safe
my
than sorry.
version. Better to be safe than sorry. How many more wonderful phrases can we get out? Yeah, so I think it's better to be safe than sorry. And contingency planning is really just another element of the whole concept of planning. Yesterday we spoke about the importance of planning when it does come to the whole concept of a project, and the better planned you are, the more likelihood you'll achieve your objectives. And contingency
Yeah,
plan is exactly the same. Be prepared for anything and have those backup plans just in case, because they may not happen, but they actually may happen. You never know.
I think you answered it really well when you said plan B. I mean, for me, a contingency is about having a backup or a plan B, having something in reserve to minimize the chance that those risks that we've identified are likely to actually happen. That's
Mm.
the way I sort of see it. And it's part of the risk management plan or a risk management table, which we'll show you in a sec. But to make this a little bit more exciting, I think we could talk through a couple of examples ourselves. So, Alison and Alyssa, I've got a couple of examples of risks here in front of me. I might just read out a few of these examples and we'll see about, as the three of us, the two of us, the three of us as a team, let's come up with some contingency plans for some of these risks. Alrighty, so
Mhm.
here's the first one. Here's a nice easy one. It's all about health and safety. So this is the risk type. It's a health and safety risk. So dangerous or hazardous chemicals are used on site and it has a potential to cause harm and injury. So on our project we have dangerous and hazardous chemicals that are used on site. It's got a potential to cause serious harm and injury. What are some contingencies that we can put in place for this particular risk, guys?
I'm thinking straight away things like ensuring that there's PPE, the good old
Mhm.
personal protective equipment, and everybody is trained properly
Mhm.
in how to use it and when to use it. That would be the first thing I'd think of immediately.
Perfect.
Mm. Yeah, and I'd,
That's
I'd definitely follow that up with some kind of policy or process or procedure in terms of handling chemicals as well. So you've got some kind of documentation that's up to date that is accessible and maybe training is based on those processes and those procedures and those standards as well.
great ideas, guys. Great ideas. And with all of these ideas, they are things that you're putting in place to prevent the likelihood that somebody's going to get injured and burnt and hurt and so forth. We're doing training. We're preparing people through giving them the necessary protective equipment they need. So they are perfect examples of contingencies. Here's another one for you, different category. A technological risk. So this one's looking at technology. Computer systems breaking down, losing all of the information about the project progress and tasks. Computer systems break down, we lose all of the information about project progress and tasks. This is an
Have
identified
we got?
risk. Yep. Sorry,
Yeah.
guys.
Have we got a I'm not really sure of the whole technological thing, but do we have we hooked ourselves up to the cloud? Have we got that external storage element there so that we've got some kind of backup?
Beautiful.
I don't know. I'm not really good with the old technology, but I'm just
That's a
thinking.
good
I'm
one.
just thinking, what
That's
would I do?
that's
I'd
the best one.
probably go to the cloud.
That's a great. That's a
My
yeah. Go for it.
My suggestion on that one would be, would you have somebody within the team who's particularly knowledgeable and good in that sort of area? You could put them in charge of, making sure that everything is backed up or having, some different systems in place and simplifying the systems. A lot of places I've worked at, there's always been that one person that's been responsible yet for doing, weekly backups and things like that. So, perhaps aligning it to one particular person who really excels in that area.
Okay, guys. I've actually written down a couple of thoughts that I had, and you've both taken both of those ideas and run with it, which is great. No, they're fantastic thoughts. They're great ideas. I mean, that's exactly what this whole process is all about: is identifying risks, coming up with a couple of ideas to put in place, and that's perfect. Okay, I'm going to give you another category: a financial risk. So running out of liquidity. Liquidity is having available cash flow. It's about having money that you can use to pay for things. So liquidity being cash flow. So running out of cash flow or available funds to finance a part of the project. This is a big one too for project managers. So what's some sort of contingency you could put in place for this particular risk occurring, running out of liquidity, running out of cash flow?
So we're running out of cash flow for a particular project.
Yeah,
Ooh.
it's an identified risk. We're worried that we could potentially run out of cash. What happens if we run out of cash? We won't be able to fund that stage 4 of the project, which means, we're stuck. What are some things that we can do before the project even starts to, alleviate the likelihood of that risk derailing us and our project?
I think the
I
first step would be to make sure that you're talking and involving the right people, so your accountant from the beginning, and then having a look to see if you do have any other equity that you might be able to perhaps get a loan on. So we don't know really what figures and things we're talking about here, but having that, I mean, it would be a pretty drastic backup plan, but if it's something that you could put there as a contingency.
Look, I really like what you've had to say there, Alison. I mean, some of these things aren't always perfect and easy to, but what you've done is you've said, you know what, we need to have the right people in the right spots, and by employing the right people in the right spots, I'm going to, minimize the likelihood that we're going to have issues. If we have the wrong people managing our finances, we've got a higher chance of having some issues. So, um, as you said, look, what I've written down here is, organize an overdraft facility or a line of credit with your bank or financial institution beforehand. So you've got backup plans. You can access extra cash if need be. So a couple of things like that would be good. Let's have a look at another one. Okay, the company is sued for breaches to privacy law. This is a legal or
Oh,
compliance risk. Ah.
oh.
So what can we do? Is there any contingency plans that you can put in place to make sure that minimize, and again, this is just about minimizing, it's our plan B, it's our backup, it's about minimizing the likelihood of these risks derailing us in our project. So can you think of anything we could do to minimize the likelihood of our company being sued for breaches in privacy law?
Well, I mean, I would probably, just to reduce that risk, I would probably make sure that, first of all of the team that were working on the project were aware of what privacy legislation was and their responsibilities in terms of privacy. I would probably incorporate it into the project scope in terms of having documentation that would support their responsibility that they had, as well as the repercussions of breaching that legislation. Any contractual agreements I also had, I would make sure that I would pop that into any contractual, between
Wow.
a third party and myself and all of that kind of stuff. I would do, if privacy was a big issue, I would make sure that everybody had adequate training. I'd probably bring a third party in to even be able to debrief them on the privacy legislation if it was a massive risk. I think that any breaches in privacy could have massive reputational issues. You just have to look at what was it, Laura? What was the one on the most recent one with the was it Laura, what was it, Laura Ashley or something? Oh, that
Oh,
company that
it's one of
Ashley
those.
Madison. You're
Yeah,
talking
with
about Ashley Madison, are you? That,
Ashley Madison that had a
yeah, yeah.
massive breach of privacy with all of
Yes,
the. I
they
mean,
did. They did.
that, yeah, and you look at the impact. I mean, if we have a look, I mean, it's probably not the most appropriate of examples, but if we look at the impact and the reach that story had, and the potential, I mean, that was absolutely massive what had
Mm,
happened,
mm.
and that was a breach of privacy. So it has a potential to do a lot of damage. Those types of things, depending on the information that you're using and the information you're exposed to when you're doing a project.
So I'm not exactly sure what happened in that situation, but it might seem clear that they didn't, identify this risk with enough weight and maybe invest enough in protecting their own, information, or the information of their clients, as it were. So,
Yeah.
yeah,
I agree.
interesting.
I think that definitely was the case. I think the information was too accessible and was, I think, limited to certain people, but it did a lot of damage, and a lot of media coverage was also followed that as well.
It did, didn't it? It really did. So
Yeah.
that's exactly what we're talking about now, is just sort of, putting things in place to minimize the likelihood. Um, should we move on to the next one? We've talked a little bit about contingencies. They all flow in really well, these questions, because it's just a nice flow of conversation anyway. So now I guess the next question is talking about um, risk management. I've got a template here that the students can use for their project. So you'll actually be putting together identifying five risks on your project. So when you come to doing your first assessment task, you'll be identifying five risks. You'll be actually describing each of those risks here and then filling in this table. Alison, can you see my screen at all from where you are?
I can, yes.
Do you want to
Excellent.
talk through what you understand? Because the risk management template or the risk management table, risk assessment in general, and also maybe a little bit about your background with risk assessment as well.
Yeah, I have actually done a lot of risk assessments in two different fields actually. I worked for an organisation which handled workplace injuries, so injury management after something bad had already happened.
Mm.
And my role was actually getting them either back to work in that same environment or retraining them and assessing what sort of new career they can go for if they couldn't go back to their old job for whatever reason. So in both situations, whether they were going back to the old job or whether they were going into a completely new workplace, because they had already been so affected by a risk at work previously, we needed to make sure that the risk assessment was done and covered absolutely everything. So for example, I might walk into a new factory. Somebody was going to go to a new job in a factory. I would have to actually have a look at everything about that environment and report back on any risk that might be there, what sort of tasks they would be undertaking, whether the actual risk, so if I identified that they would be standing in the one spot for hours at a time, so what would be the risk for that? And if I've got somebody coming back from a workplace injury where they had injured their back, yes, that's going to be a huge risk to that person. So what could happen? Well, they could strain their back or re-injure themselves from not being able to move around enough. So what's the likelihood of this risk actually causing some problems? That would be a high level of likelihood that that would happen in that situation.
Mm.
So the impact then also would be high because that particular person had already been affected in that way. So who would then be affected by that? The actual worker, the department and area that that person was working in, obviously the organisation. It also then went down the line back to the insurance company again, who had been paying that person's work cover wages for so long, the new insurance company for the new company that they're now working for. It can go on and on and on. So you need to take all of those things into consideration. So what control measures could be used? Obviously, putting a mat down for them to stand on, making sure that person had a break every 20 minutes if that's what their medical certificate required of them, changing range of movement that they could use, all of those sorts of things, and then making sure that somebody is actually monitoring this so the person doesn't just get complacent and after a couple of weeks of working there says, oh yeah, no, I'm all good, I feel okay, and so they get slack and lazy and start standing there for hours on end just to get the job done. So it needs to be monitored as well. So there's so many different factors in doing a proper risk assessment. I've also done it for brand new places. I worked in healthcare for a while, so I would send workers into people's homes who needed home care. So I would have to assess those sorts of places, and that might be just something like, okay, all I can find here, everything is fantastic, but you've got quite a few leads that actually go from the TV cabinet across the floor to where you've got the stereo going. So we need to put a mat across there to make sure that that's not a trip hazard. So there's so many different ways, but it is so, so important to do that. Otherwise you end up having the problems down the line and things get really out of control.
Sounds good. Are you able to do, I don't know if you can see this. This is a really small, what we call risk assessment matrix, which just looks at, it looks at the risk likelihood and looks at the risk impact. So
Yes.
yeah, or impact, another word for impact could be consequence. What's the consequence of that risk if it actually happens? Are you able to, I don't know if you can see that. It's a really small version of the risk assessment matrix, a 3x3.
Yeah,
You
so
wanna,
as it's got there with your risk likelihood, is it high, medium or low? So for example, as I said, the person who was going to be doing a new job standing there who'd previously had a back injury, the likelihood if they did stand there for hours on end each and every day on a cold concrete floor, the risk of them re-injuring themselves with a back injury, again, depending on what other movement they would have to do, but you would have to consider that would be high or medium, that it was likely that that person would, have risk there, that the injury might reoccur.
yeah,
And then you have to assess that impact then as well. As I said, if it does happen, that's a pretty high impact on quite a few people.
And what this little matrix is doing is saying, okay, if it's high impact or high consequence, and I'm actually just going to scroll down here, hopefully the computer responds, and if it's a high likelihood, which is this column here, you end up in this far right box here which says extensive management and senior management involvement required, which means if you've got a high likelihood and a high impact, you've got a serious risk on your hands. If the impact and the likelihood is incredibly low, then it's a different situation. So this is what we're talking about when we're evaluating risk. We're talking about risk evaluation and risk assessment. It's about really juggling those two, those two factors, the likelihood and the impact or consequence. I'm going to actually show you a risk matrix which is a little bit bigger than the one that I've got here. I'm just going to pop it up on the screen. Guys, tell me if you can see this.
Oh, I like that one.
This one's a bit nicer. It's a bit more colorful too. You can see on the left-hand side, we've got levels 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way down to 5. This is our consequence. So level 0 is negligible. The definition of that is, no injuries, no financial, it's not really much of an issue. All the way down to multiple fatalities. So number 5, that's our impact consequence. If it's that bad or that's the actual impact, then we have to put a level 5. Then you do the likelihood. So you go, okay, cool. Is it a rare, unlikely, moderate, likely, or certainty to actually occur? And then what you do is you take a combination of whichever column that you're in on the top and on the left-hand side, and you meet it in the middle. So just say we're looking at a risk which is likely and has a major consequence. We go all the way down, and it means that we're right here on that number 12. Now, if we're in that yellow column, this risk rating tells us anything between 8 and 12 is a high risk. It requires immediate corrective action. Extreme risks are even, obviously, the more extreme requires immediate prohibition of the work process and immediate corrective action. So some of the risks that you actually identify, there's no treatment that really needs to happen, or it's of no issue. So just depending on the actual risk itself, that's part of the actual process of evaluating and then assessing the actual risk and understanding what needs to be done. Did you want to add anything more at all to risk management at all? So this is the question: what should a risk management plan include? I'm happy if the guys sort of just reflect on those items that we've sort of seen in the table. You guys happy if they do something similar?
Yeah, I'm happy with that.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, grand. The next thing that we're looking at is something called a SWOT analysis. Now, a SWOT analysis, you're actually going to design a SWOT for any given project. Again, this could be the same example that you've used in the previous question. So if you've already got a project that you've used to help identify or answer question 1, question 2, use that same project. So if you want to talk about the Parliament House refurbishment, if you want to talk about a project that you've been involved in, a project that you've researched, not a problem. Design a SWOT. What we want to see is a minimum of 2 points for each letter. SWOT refers to something different. I'm actually just going to pull up an image. Do you guys see this picture on my screen?
Yep, I can see it.
So this is like a little mini SWOT analysis. Now, SWOT is an acronym. It stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Part of good preparation and good risk management and planning is identifying strengths and weaknesses that you have, but also some of the opportunities and threats that exist on any given project. It's important to note that with strengths and weaknesses, they're actually reflective of internal factors. So a strength and a weakness is looking at the internal strengths. So in things that we're doing really well internally as a company or as a project team, things we're not doing so well internally as a project team. That's our weaknesses. Opportunities and threats are external. They're things that are outside of the project team and outside of the business. So opportunities are positive factors, the things that are opportunities, the things that exist as external attractive factors that we can go out and reach. And likewise with threats, they are also external. They're not internal threats, they're external. So negative factors that sit outside or externally of the business. And that's pretty much what you see on your screen as an example of what we'd really like you to do. Just identify a couple of strengths, a couple of weaknesses, a couple of opportunities, and a couple of threats on your given project. Guys, do you want to add anything at all to SWOT analysis?
Um, no, I think that's a really nice little table. I think it's a really nice little explanation of a SWOT. I think that SWOTs are quite a useful tool when you're looking at things like project management. They can be quite simple, they can be quite contained, but they can give
Yeah.
you a lot of information. So they're definitely a handy tool, and they'll be used quite a bit in workplaces too.
Look, the way I see a
And I
SWOT.
think with
Sorry, you go for it, Alison. Apologies.
Yeah, I think things like that and your risk analysis, that sort of thing, having the right people involved in those as well. So if you were just, say you were a manager of a project and you were having 10 other people involved in the project, just sitting there and doing a SWOT analysis yourself on your own thoughts is all well and good. Bring the others in. I would always
Yep.
suggest, getting some consultation with other people as well to make sure that you're not just doing it in your own mindset, so you're getting other people's opinions and ideas as well.
It's actually an easy and gentle way, as you say, to engage other people, but to get people together to come up with, start the process of risk identification. Talking about strengths and weaknesses and opportunities and threats is actually a good way of starting the ball rolling in terms of, risk identification. That doesn't just say, okay, everybody, we need to identify potential risks, which can be a little bit dry, hard to get the ball rolling. You can get a lot of information out on these little SWOT analysis. So uh, it's not all useful though. It's not always useful. I guess I say it's a good starting point because the thing that a risk assessment and evaluation does, it actually prioritizes issues. And as per our risk management table, we have some controls in place. So we talked about contingency before. That's sort of what our risk management starts to do that a SWOT analysis won't. SWOT analysis is just a good identifier for some of the different limitations, whether it be positive or negative, that we've got surrounding our project. And as you say, Alison, it's a good one to engage with other people in the business as well, and it's a nice, easy one to do that. So, yeah, that's, I think, all we're going to talk about on SWOT. Let's move on to the next question. So just, a couple points for each. Question 5. Why do you think transparent communication is important in relation to the project budget and cost factors? So why is, we talk about communication a lot, but this one's specifically asking about budgets and cost factors. We know that we're in that preparation and planning phase. We've got to put together our budgets, put together our costings. So why is transparent communication important in relation to project budgets and cost factors? Well, I guess, what does it mean to be transparent? For me, being transparent
That's
is,
exactly
yeah,
right.
sorry.
I think the key there, Adam, is that word transparent. I mean, why do you think transparent communication is important in relation to project budgets and cost factors?
Yep.
Yeah, you're right. Like if we start at the word transparency, and I think transparency is a great word to use, and hopefully we'll use it a lot in a lot of different units throughout this course. But yeah, what does it mean to be transparent? I mean, when I think of the word transparent, I think of quite see-through. I think of quite
Yeah.
open. I think of honesty. I think of genuine. And when it comes to things like the budget and costs associated with a project, like we've talked about before, you've got a lot of people that work together and want to achieve a success on a project. They want to be kept in the loop about certain things, and it's important that there is complete honesty and there's complete openness when it comes to things, especially budget and costs associated with some of the elements of a project. So, I tend to answer this question more so from like an ethical or a moral kind of standpoint in terms of having that transparency and being honest with people.
What could happen if we're not honest with people, or what could happen if we don't, share and be transparent, as you say? What are some likely scenarios
Mm.
there?
Well, it could increase our element of risk as well.
Yeah.
It could contribute if we're not. And we've been talking about risk a lot. If we're not honest with information and we don't hand information over, then quite potentially, if you're dealing with people that are specialised additions to the project, that could implicate them and could cause certain issues to pop up with regards to a project success.
Absolute. Look, the reality is, by including more people in the conversation in relation to project budgets and cost factors, we might find cheaper or better alternatives or better ways to spend our money, the more people that we engage in that conversation, we might find, you know what, there is actually a better way to do this. And
Mm.
by sharing that information or by having that conversation, we might find sort of cheaper or better alternatives, or there might be unknown factors that we didn't even consider, but by including other people um, in that conversation, as you say, it's a risk management. It is a risk management. It's absolutely a risk management issue, that one.
Mm.
Okay, should we have a look at the last question?
Let's have a the lucky last.
Describe any project that you've been involved in where the risk factors such as cost, safety, or perhaps the correct resources were not available or prioritized. What was the impact on that project? So what we would like you to do is reflect on all of these things that we've been talking about, all of the different types of risks. You've already identified some risks. You've already identified what goes into a risk management plan, contingencies. What happens if, or let's provide a situation, provide an example. And again, you can provide an example of your own projects that you've been involved in around the house, things that you've researched. So even if you want to go online and have a look at different project mishaps or things that have happened or gone wrong on a given project, have a look and see what it was. So really what we're wanting you to identify is what happens if you don't take care of all of these things that we've talked about today. What's the impact on a project if you don't, actually, um, yeah, take care of those
And it's
risks.
usually more than one thing, isn't it? It's usually several things. Once you start thinking about the first thing, it's like, oh, that then in turn is going to affect this, that then's going to affect that. So it can be a huge list of things that it does impact. It may only be one, but it usually does spread to several areas.
Absolutely. I was telling you guys yesterday about the project that I was involved in at the call center that we rolled out a whole new series of phones, soft phones, hard phones, what have you. What the business didn't realize is that I was actually leaving the business in a short period after that project, and they had not put in any sort of succession planning or knowledge sharing with regards to me and my role. And I'm a nice enough guy that I was actually able to put the information that people needed and work with others to minimize that. But what would happen is I was about to walk out the door with all of this information. The only person in the business that really understood the machinations of that new system was able to train staff in it. And what happened? What's going to happen if I left? Well, then all of a sudden, that they were going to have to fork out a lot of money to get consultants to come in to help answer technical things that could have been dealt with in a much easier way. So the fact of the matter that they didn't organise some sort of knowledge management or succession planning with regards to my role put themselves at unnecessary risk. So there's a good example. There's one example that I was involved in. We're happy for students to research on this one. We're happy for students to even just discuss broadly. I mean, I'm happy for students to discuss broadly what the likelihood or the impact is. If you give us an example of a project, give us an example of some risks, and give us some examples of what would likely happen on those projects. So preference to doing some research on this one or using examples. What do you guys think?
It's going to be different for everybody, isn't it? So, hopefully there's something in your past, whether it's been work-based or, as you said, home-based. But yeah, if that becomes just way too difficult, then yeah, I'm more than happy for them to do a bit of research and have a look. And again, sort of, think of the big picture and try and give as much insight as you can.
Sounds good. Sounds great. I think that ends our session, today's session on risk. So today we've actually gone through all of the information that you guys need to successfully answer the learning activity project risk and budgeting. In our next session, which will be the resource support session 3 for project management, we'll be looking at the two learning activities, project rollout and resourcing, as well as project success and lessons. So that's what happens at the end of the project. Um, that's it, guys. Thanks very much for being here. Thanks for joining in the conversation. Thanks for those that are tuned in to watch the video. Looking forward to seeing your submissions on this learning activity, and we'll see you in the next session. Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Bye.